Hello, my name is Father Tony Bidgood here at St. Teresa's Parish, and I'm a member of the Redemptorist Adult Faith Formation Team. And I'm happy to spend a few minutes with you today to reflect with you about this Advent season. The more I think about Advent, especially this year in this time of pandemic, which has influenced every aspect of our life, the images of wilderness and exile speak more loudly to me. We often think of Advent in the beauty of the candles and the wreath and the decorations, and Advent often gets swallowed up in all of the preparations for the wonder and romance of Christmas. But if you dig down into the readings of Advent, you see some themes there that are rather surprising, disturbing, even shocking. This is what I mean. On the second Sunday of Advent, which we just finished, you heard the readings from Isaiah in which God tells Isaiah to say to the people, "Comfort, comfort my people, says the Lord. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Tell them that their exile, their time of exile, is coming to an end." It's a very beautiful reading. What's interesting about that reading is it is set in a time when the people of Israel are not at home. They are in exile in Babylon. They have been invaded and captured in whole and moved to a whole other country. And for generations they lived there. Imagine the grief and the loss that those people must have felt. Imagine how the older generations mourned over the fact that their children and grandchildren never knew what the promised land held. They were disconnected from their history and from their identity. Such was exile for them. And yet in that place of exile, away from the promised land, away from Jerusalem, away from all of the identifiers of their faith, God speaks to them and says, "Comfort, comfort my people. I will speak tenderly to you." I think it's really interesting that Isaiah, as one of the great prophets of Advent, invites and challenges you and I to listen for God's voice in times and places of discomfort, of exile and alienation. In this time of pandemic, we are all in a kind of exile. All of our lives have changed. The normal life, so-called normal life, that we once enjoyed, we no longer live in the same way. In some ways, we are in exile from the ways that things used to be and from what was comfortable. This particular Christmas, there are many who cannot journey home to Newfoundland or to wherever we're from to spend time with family. And so there's a kind of an exile there as well. I think of people, rotational workers, who come home and have to be in 14 days quarantine, in exile from family and friends. And yet in this Advent season, we hear these words again spoken to us today, as it was back then: "Comfort, comfort my people." The voice and presence of God finds us in our exile. The voice and presence of God speaks comfort to us in places that are unfamiliar and scary, that are not normal. There's a powerful message there for us in this Advent season to apply to our experience of this pandemic and really of any moment in our life when we feel scared, alone, frightened, or separated from our own identity, family, and friends. God speaks comfort. God finds us in those places of exile. That's part of the message of Advent. It's not romantic, it's not nice, it's not surrounded in beautiful lights or decorations, but it's real, it's genuine, it's comforting, and it's reassuring. In the second Sunday of Advent, as I said, in the Gospel, we are also introduced to John the Baptist. John the Baptist is the great prophet that comes after a long time in which the prophetic voices were not heard. And John is very charismatic, we're told. People are drawn to him. But note where John lives and does his ministry. We're told he's in the wilderness. He's not in the temple in Jerusalem. He's not in Jerusalem at all, the holy city. He's not found in the synagogue. He's not in the halls of power, in the palaces of Herod. He is literally out in the wilds. As we would say here in Newfoundland, he's out in the woods. He's in the wilderness. The wilderness was a foreboding place. It's a place where wild animals live. It's a place of extreme temperatures. There's no comforts in the wilderness. And yet that's where John is found. Not only is John found there, the wilderness is the place where people were sent into exile. So if you think of, in Jesus' day, those who had diseases like leprosy, they couldn't go to the temple or walk the streets of their towns. They had to live outside of the boundaries of civilization because people were afraid of catching the disease. If we think of others like the shepherds who are watching their flocks at night, as we will hear about them in the Christmas season, shepherds were considered to be dirty. They spent time with the sheep. And in a time of great cleanliness and ritual purity and cleanliness of the Jewish religion, shepherds were looked down upon. Many others with illnesses and diseases were seen, or our actions were seen as people who committed sins. And so they too were shunned and in a type of exile, in a type of wilderness. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." People go out of the comfort of the temple and this holy city, out into the dangerous, wild place to hear God speak. That's where they found John. That's where he prophesied from. That was his temple. That was his pulpit. The wilderness, a place of rejection, another place of exile. That's where God's word was heard and was found and drew people. We're reminded today then, in the season of Advent, to think of the wilderness places and the people in them in our own time and place. To recognize that God is there with them too. And not only is God there with them, God speaks in those times and places that are wilderness today and in the inhabitants of the wilderness. I think of those people who no longer come to church for any kind of reason, good people who struggle with faith. They have something to say to us, and I think God speaks through them. And we who are in church might do well to listen to what they have to say. I think of the poor, the clients that go to the gathering place, or those clients served by St. Vincent de Paul and other organizations in our city and province. They too are in the wilderness of an economy that has failed them, the wilderness of addictions, or the wilderness of whatever issues they struggle with. They are lost and forgotten in society too. And yet God, we know, is with them, and God speaks among them and stands among them. Will we listen to what God has to say? I think of others who feel alienated from church, such as our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, who feel they have no place, no welcoming in our church. They too can be considered in a certain kind of exile. God is with them, and God speaks through them. Will we listen? The list goes on and on. Advent invites you and I to enjoy the beauty and the comfort of the symbols of Advent, as well we should. They are meant to bring comfort. But also to recognize that in places where we least expect God to be, God is there. In voices in people who we least expect God to speak, God also speaks. This is part of our scriptural tradition. This is what Isaiah was talking about. It's what John the Baptist did. And John the Baptist proclaimed the coming of the Lord. And even Jesus went out to the wilderness to be baptized by John. So in this Advent season, then, let us prepare our hearts to celebrate Christmas, albeit in a very different way in this pandemic, but yet recognize that even in this time of global pandemic, God speaks to us in our exile. God is close to us, and God says to us, "Comfort, comfort my people."